is 2.64 million. So we're starting to get close to that number by about $600,000. Just to share that. Oh, and there's the surplus deficits there on the right. Looking at the enterprise funds, here I just categorize the enterprise funds all on one page, where we have that's our airport, our Cortez Community Network, or CCN, the dispatch, the hydro, recreation center fund, refuse, and the water funds. Again, as a reminder, the enterprise funds are funds that are expected to be running as a business and should be self-sustaining. So whatever revenues come in, they should cover all expenditures. As we quickly look over the airport, the fund balance is projected to increase year over year. And of course, the details for all these funds and the expenditures are detailed in the budget. The CCN fund also right now, based off of the current model and how it's operating, is expecting an increase year over year. The dispatch fund is as well as maintaining. Yep. Is there a comment? Okay. The dispatch fund also.
Feedback sometimes.
Oh, okay. And please ask me to stop if I need to repeat or slow down.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The dispatch fund is adding a little bit every year, and that is mostly due to depreciation. So depreciation allows the building of the fund, so that way you can afford future improvements and such, and other maintenance or capital projects. The hydro plant fund is actually decreasing year over year. And as you remember, as was discussed, I forget whether it's the last council meeting or prior, the decrease is due to the changes with the contract with Empire Electric and the revenues decreasing. As we continue in future years, the expectation is there'll be a continued deficit year over year. So that fund balance would actually go into the negative. The Recreation Center has an initial decrease for 20 to 21, and then it flattens out over the next 2 years. Refuse fund slightly decreases year over year, and then the water fund has a large increase and decrease. Because of the refuse and water fund, the nature of of how they work, in that the fund balance will primarily be determined upon whether it grows or decreases, will be determined on what larger or what capital expenditures are incurred in those funds. And that's why you see a little more variation in those two funds. Any questions with the enterprise fund?
Nothing down here.
Moving on to let me double check the Zoom here for all participants. Oh, it's not showing well here. Okay.
Ben, can you tell us how many people we have on Zoom, like any participants?
Yeah, I was able when I was not sharing. Here we go. Let's see if it'll come up. Yes, we have 2 attendees online.
Thank you.
Yep. And for those attendees who are online, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll address your questions. Okay, so no questions at this time. So moving on to the internal service funds. The internal service funds are those funds that capture the revenues and expenditures related to services provided within the city and the government itself. So our first fund here is our self-insured health fund. That's how healthcare is funded and managed. We are self-insured. So the revenues come in are the contributions that employees in the city makes for the employees for health insurance. And it's growing readily every year, which is a positive, because this is one of those funds where the fund balances we're actually unsure about. So we haven't really made any changes on how it's structured at this point, because we need validation from the audit and what the actual fund balance is. The next 2 funds are the shop and technology funds, and they are more or less they're flat, where revenues and expenses are balanced. So we're not trying to make money in these funds or overcharge the general fund or other funds for services provided by these. So I would typically expect them to be flat or grow ever so slightly. So that way, projects or other efforts needed to be that are needed funding can be funded by those funds without having to borrow money from a general fund or other funds. Are there any questions regarding internal service funds?
Nothing down here, Ben.
All right, thank you. Then we move on to the special revenue funds. And our first fund here is the Conservation Trust Fund. You'll see it increases in 2021. Yeah.
Ben, we have someone raising their hand on the attendees.
That's interesting. I can't see that. Thank you. And I believe, Kyle, can you let one of them speak? I believe you have that control.
I don't happen to see anyone who has their hands raised.
I don't see the hand raise either.
Okay, sorry, alert across the bottom said Emily Hayes had raised their hand.
Okay.
Or I think that was the name, sorry. Okay, I just wanted to double check.
No, absolutely. This is the time for public comment, so I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, Kyle. So the Conservation Trust Fund, that is the fund that it's funded by sales of lottery tickets by the state. And then with the revenues that the state receives for those lottery tickets, they then share out the funds through all the communities and local municipalities throughout the state. The Conservation Trust Fund is expected to have a large increase of revenues once we get our audits complete, because this is one of those funds where the state has been withholding those revenues. Hence, we see the large increase there. And then we get back to normal of receiving revenues on the CTF on a quarterly basis. Additionally, in 2022, I believe in the budget is expected to use some of those monies towards projects within the city. The equipment fund, it does have a large balance, and the 2021 balance here increases because we're not expending anything out of the equipment fund in 2020. 2021, there's slight expenditures out of there, which would for, I believe, 4 police vehicles. It may be 3. That was based off of council's ask at the council's budget meeting. And then we get back to normal spending I believe in 2022. Then the street improvement fund, it's decreasing. And the main reason for that is it's more or less, it's similar to the refuse and water, where the revenues they come in, the expenses are based off of the capital projects for that year. And right now the capital projects projected in 2022 or 2021 and 2022 combined would put the street improvement fund in a deficit there. Now, before moving on to special revenue funds, any questions?
No.
Okay.
Nothing down here.
And looks like we're good online. And then moving on to the last 2 slides, what we have here are the capital projects. This first slide is a snapshot of the capital projects that were in the 2020 approved budget last year by the previous council. Next to each of those, the projects. So what we have is funds and then the projects below. So what it means is the airport fund is funding 2 projects here, the taxiway shoulder project and then the seal coat remark runway project. Whereas then in this next down, we have Conservation Trust Fund and the general fund. We're both funding the construction of the old high school park. So the funding was split between those 2 funds. What we show is initially the first column is the investment amount. The second column would be the grant amount if there are grants associated to that project. And then what's left there is the net city funding. Okay. On the far right, what I quickly did was went through each project and compared to our current project list on the revised 2021 budget. And that's this last slide that we have here. So if we just do a quick comparison between the two slides, the items in green with a green check mark are projects that are still on the docket for 2021, or excuse me, for 2020. The items with the red check or the red X were projects that were pulled from the 2021 revised budget. Slight blue checks here are projects that are still on the docket, still to be done, but maybe at a reduced funding amount. Majority of the funding and the reduction of fundings was due to availability of funds due to COVID. So we did back in April. There was council approved a reduction in the budget of expenses, and that's why we see these reductions here. And then again on the last page, here's a list of the projects for 2020, and then a list of new projects for 2021. And that is the what I have for a slide deck at this point. Are there any questions regarding the 2021 proposed budget that I've shared briefly right now? Okay.
Nothing down here, Ben.
Okay.
None for me.
All right.
Ben?
Yes.
Look, Emily Hayes has her hand raised.
All right. Yes, she does. Thank you. Okay. Emily, are you able to speak, or are you still on mute at this point? No response means you're on mute. All right. And
Hi, Ben.
Kyle? There we go. Hi.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I'm wondering, and I'm, kind of new to looking into this stuff, so bear with me if this is maybe a simple question, but looking at the deficit prediction for the 2021 budget and then for the 2022 budget, projecting budgets, or is that, something that reflects the impact of COVID-19 or something else from the coming years?
Emily, I really apologize. You did cut out on me. I heard up
sorry.
to that. If you don't mind repeating some of that, I apologize.
Oh no, yeah.
Up to you, I had heard the projected deficits for 2021 and 2022, and that's where I lost you.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry if this is maybe a simple question because I'm new to looking into this stuff. But is there a typical something that's atypical because of COVID or another economic impact, or is that something that you typically see when you're budgeting out for coming years?
You speaking specifically where there's a surplus or deficit?
Right. So a deficit, that doubles almost between 2021 and 2022.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is we're talking specifically about the general fund. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And that fund holds most of the city services that we provide. When I mean city services, the city manager, finance, HR, planning and building, shop, police department, Parks and Rec, those main governmental entities, okay, or departments. The surplus or deficit can vary depending on year based off of priorities of council, but also based off of the amount of a reserve that's available. All right. So let me share my screen one more time here. So as we're looking at the general revenue fund here, or excuse me, the general fund, I'm not sure why I said revenue, but the general fund here is the fund balance is, let's say right now predicted for 2020, the end of 2020, beginning of 2021 is 4.53 million, okay? By code, we need to have 2.25 million available for kind of like, if you want to say rainy day fund, right? A minimum requirement. What that means at the end of the day, how I look at it is you have in essence $2 million here that you can dip into if there are priorities that want to be addressed, and that's purely upon the council's decisions, whether they deem so or not. So I'm not sure if I really want to call it atypical or typical. It just comes down to the prioritizations of projects that are occurring, different activities that are occurring within the city, and service levels and services that are provided.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And are there any other quick questions? Otherwise, I know you have a individual there in the city hall there in the council chambers that would like to speak briefly.
Can I just ask one quick clarifying question, Ben? So based on the budget and prioritization of what, projects, basically you're saying, because you're predicting or estimating how much we're going to bring in sales tax, and so that's the number you use so based on whether we dip into reserves or not.
Right. And I think there was a part of Emily's question that I did not address, which I realize now was about COVID impact. And your question, council member, relates to that and relating to the revenues. Our revenues for sales taxes are for 2020 revised is less than what we would have, or is a reduced projection of sales tax revenues due to COVID. For example, remember we discussed we're projecting based off of a potential recession next year of about 7% decrease of sales taxes from 2019 taxes that were collected. We hope that doesn't come to fruition, of course, right? So if sales taxes continue to come in as they are right now, which is above what we were expecting due to COVID impacts, then that could actually, our revenues could come in better than what we expected in 2021 and 2022, because 21 and 22 are based off of the revenues from 2020 that we're actually seeing at this point. So there is a portion of revenues that impacts it, but there's also the amount of expenditures that's impacting. So for example, going from 11.2 million of expenditures to 12.09 of expenditures, what are the priorities that are in there for services or projects, and then another increase into 2022. Does that help clarify, Councilmember Medina?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Ben, this is Arlena.
Yeah.
So this graph that we're looking at encompasses everything that we've already discussed. So like the project that we pushed for like the parking lot of the golf course pushed into 2022. So like that's encompassed in that as well.
Correct. It is. It is. And I think also one of the other items that was asked for purchases were police vehicles in 2021, because the initial draft budget had 0 purchases of police vehicles, but the request was to add a few back in for 2021, which we did do. So those asks that we had when we met with you last regarding the budget were added.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay.
Ben, we have a question from an audience member here in council member chambers.
Yes, please.
This is just Commissioner Candelaria. Thank you for letting me speak tonight, Mayor and city council members. At our board-to-board meeting a couple of weeks ago, one of the items that were discussed was County Road 23 that turns into F Road down by the airport, which the airport obviously serves all of the constituents of Montezuma County, the city of Cortez, Dolores, Mancos, Pleasant View, Toyac. And we had asked for you all to consider doing some cost sharing in that road so that we can upgrade it, because if we're looking at economic development, one of the biggest things that you have is flight service coming into to the city and repairing that road. I did miss the presentation last week. I was on a Zoom meeting with the state, so I apologize for that. But I can't, Ben, I apologize. I didn't bring my glasses and I can't read your capital projects because it's pretty small. My old eyes are not working well with this piece of paper tonight. But from what he went over, you do have discretionary funds of up to $2 million right now that I see. If that's correct, Ben, if I understand that correctly, after you keep your allotted $2.5 million in reserve. So basically what I'm asking is the consideration of the council to actually reconsider that and to put that money in that budget to help us, to work with us in the county to get that road brought back up to a condition that is more suitable. It is failing right now, you know, and we do need to do something with it. I do think that we made a great step forward with working on roads together. Although you guys were not able to participate dollar-wise, you were able to participate with 7th Street Extension by giving us the right-of-way. So by working and talking and communicating together, I think we've made a good step forward to doing things that serve all of the constituents of the entire county, which is really what we serve. I realize they're somewhat specific within the city, but if we look at it and you have that much money to have at your discretion, I would ask that you consider that that dollar value that we had placed forward. And I sent that email to Phil Johnson for that consideration of that road in your capital projects for next year. Do you have any questions for me?
John, do you have any comments?
My only comment is the same as what Worley was, as a street that's outside the city limits, and we're not taking care of our own city streets. Bill is behind, I believe, a year or two, maybe 3, on road maintenance. I don't believe we did any this year, and so everything's now behind schedule.
And I understand that, and I don't, you know, I can't, I haven't followed your budget that closely, but again, I'm just saying that that is still an economic driver of the entire city and the county. So I would think that just for consideration, please discuss it one more time and look at the things that I mean, the more people that we get into our city, obviously the more your sales tax go up, and that's really what gives you the money to provide the services back out to the people that we do serve. And infrastructure is one of the biggest priorities that we have. And so, you know, again, I would like to, you know, hear what the entire council, Orly was not at that meeting, at the board-to-board meeting. So, you know, basically when we had that discussion, everybody that was there was on board, and now it seems like it just fell off of the map. So again, it's just for a reconsideration of everything that we all do, working together, really bring the sales tax to the entire city.
I put Shaq on the spot at the last council meeting, asking, do we have an idea of what we're asking for, which you guys are planning on doing? And at that point, a week ago, it was not really. So you guys now know how much money you're asking for?
We actually, and I apologize again, Shaq, I had met with our road superintendent that day and then got caught into another meeting. And like I said, I was late coming into the meeting last week. We do, and I've sent that to Phil Johnson. Our ask was $140,000, which was basically for a 2-inch mat. And just the 2-inch mat for that approximately 0.75, roughly it's right in there around 3,400 feet. And then the county would take care of everything else. They would take care of the leveling course on it, and Obviously, it can be anywhere from an inch to, it could be 3 inches depending on the rutting of the road and how that leveling mat stabilizes that 2 inch. But for budgetary purposes, is all we were asking for was a 2-inch mat that you could figure throughout the length of the project. We'd then take care of all of the prep prior to it, all of the potholes, the shouldering, the striping, everything else that has to go along with it to get the project completed. If you go down Road G right now, you can see that we've done a lot of work to that point, even beyond. So we want to try and get that brought up to speed just within that, just basically to the airport where that asphalt ends right now. So it is kind of, is it in the county? Absolutely. But it does benefit both of us.
I have a few questions then. Is this something that, would this be like a one-time thing, or would you want this to be a joint project perpetually?
Well, right now, I mean, obviously roads are a consistent need. If we put the asphalt mat on it right now, you're going to get, the longevity is a little bit better than the chip seal, which I'm pretty sure that's asphalt. I'll take anything that I can get. I think that right now, if we get the road upgraded, it's a little bit easier to maintain in the long run. But I don't know what agreements were ever made in the past between the city and the county for that extension of that road. And we're just talking that extension, that 3/4 of a mile. We already take care of G Road all the way up to CDOT's right of way, and then obviously CDOT takes care of the rest of it into town.
Okay. Would you be able to get an estimate of what the cost would be to the county, including like in-kind and all that work?
I can't.
Okay.
And I don't have that number with me right now. We were just trying to get together a budgetary number for you all to look at for just that 2-inch mat. And to figure that, that's why we figured just a 2-inch mat, because you can't figure out the leveling course underneath it.
Okay. Because I guess I just want to see it comparable, because if we equate it to say like population, you know, we pay that percentage, we'll pay that percentage, but if we pay more than the county, then that doesn't seem feasible.
I can get those numbers.
Okay. Then for Ben or John, would say we did agree to this project, would that money have to come from the general fund, or have to come from the streets fund, or a different fund?
John, do you want to answer that first, or would you like me to address that?
Well, we would try and take it from the streets fund first. Because I don't know that we've taken roads from the general fund itself.
Right, and that would be my inclination as well. And on the screen right now, so Commissioner Candelaria, hopefully it's a little bigger for you to see as well, is in the budget. And when we're looking at the actual budget itself, if you're following along in the budget itself, it's around pages 75. And what we have is the street improvement fund here for 2020 on the left-hand side and 2021 on the right-hand side. And what you'll see, if we're talking about 2021, we have different breakdowns that the Director Phil Johnson has provided of capital projects, street improvements, specific reconstruction of Mildred Street, Chip Bog Streets, and all the, so he has identified a number of projects to be worked on that year for improvements within the city limits, right? If council has a choice, you can increase the current investment in amount of 1.9 million by another 140K, or you can keep it in the 1.9 million and reprioritize monies within street improvements or the capital projects. I'm not sure what capital projects or streets specifically are on the docket or are planned for. I know it's there, but I don't know what they are. They're with the department head there. So it'd be a reprioritization. So there would be something else that does not get done, and that would be a council decision at that point. Give you an idea of reminder. So where that sits in the context of the street improvement fund, on the far right hand side is the fund balances for the street improvement fund. And the first column is 2020 revised, 2021, and then 2022. So increasing expenses would further, it created a larger deficit that's budgeted for at this time. So there are other aspects to maybe just be aware of as further discussions are had, or whether guidance to staff or how to go forward.
Do we have someone that could evaluate this project and come up with what they think the cost would be, just to compare it to what the county has, just to make sure they wouldn't be over asking or overcharging?
I believe that'd be up to Phil. Phil has those resources. Phil Johnson, department head, would have those resources. I believe he has someone who he could work with to do that.
What we would do is, our city engineer is not contractual, so he would contact them and have them work it out and then bill us for it.
And I guess that's what I'm saying. We estimated it at 140,000. Is that what it's actually going to cost? I don't know, but we do get a very good cost on our asphalt from the county. That's how we're able to do so many roads, because we do a lot in comparison to the city. The miles of road that we do a year annually compared to you all, significant. So our cost is very good, and that's basically what we're asking for. But if you do, and Phil would be able to figure that for you, and I'm sure he would have the same numbers that we do. And that's why we said we're just figuring it at the 2-inch mat, so that it's something you can figure and not the leveling course.
And in your proposal, you offer, or you stated that, say the project ended up costing more, you guys would cover all extra costs.
It's going to cost more than 140,000 because by far,
Right.
just because that's that 2-inch mat, we're taking care of everything else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to make sure you wouldn't like come back to the city and ask for more money.
No,
Okay.
because I think at the cost that we get, when we put our figures together, that we should be right at. Hopefully just a little bit less, but for a budgetary number, we don't want to be under it and overextend.
Okay.
So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Ben, I'll bring my glasses next time if I have to read your report.
Yeah, I apologize. It's a lot of information on that sheet.
It's okay. I should have been very prepared as far as that. Thank you for consideration and
And Commissioner Candelaria, I do have this written down as well as a note.
okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner.
By chance, are there any other questions regarding that or continuation on? Is there anyone else that's arrived in the forum there?
There's no one else down here, Ben.
Okay. And we still have 2 attendees online. Would either of you have any further questions or comments?
No questions down here, Ben.
Okay.
No comments.
I see we have, again, Emily or Jane who are following. I'll open it up to you if you have questions or comments. Okay.
Ben, this is Rachel. Can you remind us what our budget timeline is again?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I'm going to pull up the budget. And again, just so everyone is aware, the budget is available on the City of Cortez's website within the finance menu header. And there's also directions on how to submit public comments. So that way I can receive them and make note and share them with council members. Okay, So here's where we are at right now. So it is what, September 15th? We're in the public review, and I believe I have the instructions I've shared with public through social media and whatnot. We're accepting public comment until next Friday, I believe it is. And then once we have all public comments, if there are any changes, we would discuss them with council and give you the opportunity to review or suggest any changes from there. And then the thought is we would have council approval, and it is, excuse me, the budget is it would be an ordinance, so it would have 2 budget hearings. The first one, based off of this, would be October 13th, with the final reading and hearing occurring on, if assuming we stay with the schedule, would be on October 27th.
Is all the budget stuff now gonna happen all during like our regular meetings, or are we having any more special meetings?
I think it would depend upon the quantity and significance of any potential changes, whether that would drive a special meeting or we could do it in a work session to gather input. And then we can go from there. Right now, the only open question that we have is the $140,000 for the airport road, whether to include it, exclude it, or how to go forward with that. But I would assume that a small change that we could address during a workshop session. Mr. Doherty, do you have any further comments regarding that?
No, you're right.
Okay. So, I mean, at this point, it's just a matter of holding on for any further public comment or public input and have uncomfortable silence. But I'd also, yeah, but I was saying, please ask questions.
Please say something. Ben, can you go back to that graph with all the bars? The general fund?
The general fund one? Yes, you bet.
Yeah, well, that one. Okay, so is there a way you can enlarge it?
Yeah, bear with me a moment.
Okay, I have a question for John. So this bucket, like this surplus of funds, like the 4.29, has that historically existed for the city budget? Like, have we as previous councils not spent down excess funds on major projects, or do you know kind of what that history looks like?
I don't have a lot of history other than, because when I got here, it was, let's put things on hold because we don't know, it'd be great if these fund balances are actually accurate.
Right.
But since we're not sure, it was, let's not be spending money we don't really know that we have. So I think it was a caution to council that we can spend ourselves into a hole without even realizing it. Right. So the best thing to do is to maintain what we have, but not go overboard until we figure out where we stand with these actual fund balances.
Okay, and so assuming this, this projection, I guess. Sorry, Ben, did you want to say something more to that?
I was going to add something that Mr. Doherty had mentioned at our, I believe our budget meeting with you all, or special meeting we had, is that excess fund balance that you see there. would typically be used in times that we're like now that we're seeing for unusual circumstances, right? To give you a cushion by which to help manage your and keep you whole from an expense standpoint, right? So that's another purpose for having above the required minimum.
Right, so looking at your projections now for the 2022, 2023, like assuming we don't have that like surplus recharge, we're gonna be looking at probably not a whole lot of extra large projects in 2023. It's more just like an observation, but if you have any other context to put on that.
So
Keep in mind, that the further out you go, the less likely that these projections are gonna be accurate. My guess is the first few years will be fairly close, but then after that, it's a real, I have no clue. At some point, we're gonna hit another recession type of thing, slowdown in general. When that's gonna be is anybody's guess. Are we gonna have a resurgence this fall and winter of COVID along with the flu? I hope not, but they're not real rosy on their projections.
right, and I don't want to make it.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Ben, this is Amy. I have this picture, this memory of in my mind of one of your beautiful graphs. I'm
Lost you.
Councilmember Hutkins, we lost you for a moment.
The coming years look like.
I'm very sorry.
I don't know. It's lofty. It's lofty, but
No. I'm sorry. It's not chuckling at anything you said. We just couldn't hear what you said. You cut out.
oh, really? Oh my gosh, no. Okay. Well, first of all, I complimented your graph skills. I couldn't remember what page of the budget it's at, but it's a graph that's going horizontally along, and it's showing projections. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And it's showing projections. I'm remembering the library being on there, which I think is 5 years out. And you had things really mapped out into the future for projections.
Mm-hmm.
Do you happen to have that available or know what I'm talking about?
I do so many graphs, I guess I forgot it.
I know, and it's in my memory bank, and I just don't know what page to. Okay, maybe I'll sift through and see.
Let me.
But I feel like that kind of addresses like how much down the line we'll need, right?
I know, like, I believe I hear somebody else speaking. Is there another question?
I think she's referencing the 5-year capital projects page.
Boom.
Yes, that's kind of what I was thinking about. So I'll bring that up again. Here we go. I'll zoom out, and I'm sharing my screen. Is this kind of what you're thinking of? Councilmember?
Yeah, that's really hard for me to see. But yeah, so 2025, exactly.
Correct.
Thank you for this.
It gives you the 5-year plan here gives you an idea of a runway of projects, of potential projects that are anticipated. Some of the projects, are fairly well known, and you're going to have to do them year in, year out. For example, on this page 77, where we're looking at street improvement fund, you're going to have reconstruction, maintenance, sealing, concrete, storm drain. It's just a matter about how much is allocated towards those projects every year. Whereas when we go up and look at the general fund, as you pointed out, was the library, for example, had expansion of 7.5 million in 2025. And that's more of a mechanism by which it was put here as something that was discussed in the past Are we anywhere near being able to fund that project? At this point, no, I don't think we have enough planning discussion have been set aside for that project. But it's there, so it's more lofty in nature, if you want to say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess we wouldn't be thinking about planning for that 7.5 million yet in 2021, or is that a discussion we should have?
I would defer to John as well, John Doherty, that is, and I would also my thoughts are is if you know you're going to have a large project that you want to budget for in the future, then that comes back to another concept of why you may want to build up your fund balance to be able to fund those large projects either fully and by yourself rather than have to go out for raising funds through bonds or whatnot.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree with what Ben said. You want that fund balance up there so you don't have to go out for borrowing money. You never know when it's gonna be high interest rates or not, so it's just best to stick that money in the back pocket and keep it there as long as possible.
Right. And coming back to Councilwoman Yazi's questions about the fund balance here, and what John Doherty, our city manager, has said is we don't know exactly what our fund balance is because our audits are incomplete, right? And right now, I can't tell you whether this 4.29 is even what it really is. You know, we're working on 2016 right now, and there are some nuances of, I don't want to overcomplicate this. There's so we have, you're all familiar with Tabor. Tabor says you can only bring in so much money a year, okay? And the city back quite a few years ago did what's called debruced, which meant the money that came in over allowed what Tabor says you can bring in. Debrucing meant the city could keep it. Okay, so that's good. Whereas before, what would have happened is the city would have to give the money back to the community in some way or another. When we debruced, what the excess revenue, so that's the revenue that came in over and above what Tabor said you could actually keep. That excess revenue should go over to what's called a capital improvement fund. I discovered last year that was not occurring like it was supposed to have been. Okay, so the excess revenue that comes into the general fund or that's collected, the general fund needs to transfer monies out of the general fund. So what would happen is out of the balance fund that you see here of 4.29, for example, into what's called a capital improvement fund. And then the capital improvement fund is where your capital projects should be funded out of, okay? That was not happening. With 2016 audits now since we caught it and understood this was not happening correctly, we are making those corrections starting in 2016. That is going to impact the fund balance, but I can't tell you to what extent yet, because we need to get several years. We need to get up to date to 2020 before I can tell you what it actually is. But I do know that in 2016, for example, we had to transfer. There's a total for a 2016 balance in the capital improvement fund. We had to move out of general fund to capital improvement about what was it? 2.6 million. Okay, and so now we're working to have any capital project or capital expenditure, rather than hitting the general fund, it would hit that capital improvement fund. So these pluses and minuses, these transactions, they are going to impact the fund balance. So that's why John Doherty was saying is last year when he came in, understanding the status of our audits and not having comfort with the fund balances, of why last year the 2020 approved budget was a balanced budget. Because we had the confidence around these fund balances it's limited.
Ben, this is Rachel. I have a question about grants. So once we're able to have access to grants, do you think that being able to access those monies would help alleviate our budget a little bit, or does it actually increase our budget because, you know, most of them require match, or, you know, we're gonna end up prioritizing things?
Okay, a very good question. I'm going to give you a general answer, then I'm going to kind of go into a little more another way of looking at the budget, or how I look at the budget. So I think in general, grants are going to, they typically do not offset operational expenditures. Okay, it's going to be for something new. So because it's net new, and because, as you mentioned, we have to typically match or a portion or half of a grant, it's a net increase. So it would increase your budget. Okay. The challenge that I see ahead for the city is the operating cost. Okay. So that's where here we're looking right now on page 18 of the budget, of the general fund budget. And what we'll have, just 3 sections: the revenues, operating expenditures, other expenditures, and that gives you down to your change in net position, which is your net revenue. Okay. So when we're talking about grants, they're talking about, again, it's not operating expenditures, it's something new. It's usually a capital project of some sort. Okay. Or in the case of the police, it's actually providing a service that's well funded. So the police has the Victims Assistance Program, I believe, and the grants that we get from that offsets a good chunk of those costs. The challenge here is if you look at your operating expenditures, and your operating expenditure is, those are the costs that you're incurring to run day to day. So if you're thinking about your own budget, right, your operating cost is those costs that are non-discretionary. So you as an individual, you need food, you need gas for your car, you need heating and electricity for your home, and what other expenses you must have, you know. Whereas then whatever's left over, you get to use for fun, right? Going out to dinner, doing a trip or something. So those base costs of operating, when you look at our operating costs for 2020, revised 2020 to 2021 to 2022, they are increasing every year. Now the question is, are they increasing at a rate that's greater than the revenue that's coming in? And that's where I think part of Emily Hayes's question may come in, is how are we looking? Is this atypical or not? And you know, it's not saying it's one way or the other. It's just the trend that we're on right now is our operating expenses are increasing every year. And at some point, when we go back and look at this graph here in the slide deck, is at some point, if the revenues can't keep up with the expenses and the fund balance gets to the minimum required, there's a potential for hard decisions to be made in the future. And I'm a person for my own budget, is I plan kind of how Councilmember Huckins is talking about with the library project in 2025, is I personally, on my own budget, I plan out that far. I plan out to save money so I can do those fun and exciting things, take a trip or whatever it is. And so I got to manage my expenses and make sure they're not growing more quickly than what I'm actually bringing in. So that's me being very frank, it's something to be aware of and to watch. Because as John Doherty mentioned, is the further out you get in a projection, the more inaccurate the numbers become. They more become an indicator of where you're trending, at least. And I think that's what we're showing, is we're trending that there's a potential that the operating expenditures are growing a little more quickly than the revenues coming in.
Ben, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I think you're doing a marvelous job given the situation we're in. But given our current scenario, how far in advance do you feel comfortable in your projections? I know that's a wide open question, but I'm just curious.
Sure. I'm gonna share on the screen again the general fund budget again on page 18, and breaking down the types of major line items we have. Okay. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is let's talk about where our projections are. We're projecting revenues, we're projecting operating expenditures, and then we're projecting other expenditures such as capital projects or grants, debt service within the general fund. I am I'm more confident in the expenditure and projections of the expenditures, because we know we better know what we're spending our money on. And coming from the department heads, they're saying this is what it takes to run my department, and that's what we're showing more or less here in the operating expenditures. It's what it takes to run that department, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, when we're looking at myself in finance, I know, okay, what is that? That's my team, and so that's the total compensation. That is, we have some expenditures for the software that we use, and we've also, as you know, we've budgeted for consultants to help with the consultants and the auditor to get the audits out the door, right? And that's why you see a large drop in 2022, by the way. But I know what they're coming up. I may be a little off, they say 1 to 5%. That's not a whole lot to be off of in the grand scheme of things, but I'm confident here. So I'm confident that our expenditures are pretty close to what are reasonable. Okay. If I had to say a percentage, let's say it's about 90-95% confidence on the expenditures. Revenues is a little harder. And when we're talking about revenues, the ones that are a little more difficult, and I'm going to go down a page here into the revenue section where we have revenues broken out by major line item. The revenues that are more challenging to forecast out is the biggest number is sales tax. And part of that is because of, it's a couple. One is the projections that were done by my predecessor were very inaccurate. And so I had to go back and do a lot of what projections based off of what actuals were coming in. And so I didn't have a good idea of how projections were. So based off of historical sense, so to speak, right? So that's one. The other is with COVID impact, and then how the national government responds with stimulus or lack of stimulus, and then what's that effect or impact at the local level. So it gives me there's a lot of variability, and as you all know, I'm hope we've been very transparent in sharing with you how we're projecting sales tax through the COVID impact every month, right? And you've been able to see that we've the sales taxes have actually been coming in higher than what we forecasted the COVID impact would have. So that's very positive. So there's a little volatility there, so it's a little harder to get there. So that's a big one. Another one that's hard to project out will be coming down a little lower on page 19 here. We're down at the mineral leasing tax and local government severance tax. Those are rather large amounts. Again, anywhere from $650 to $750, $800,000 a year is what it's been historically. All the indications from the oil and the extraction industries, which is oil and gas and natural gas, and plus guidance from state and other entities like Colorado Municipal League, are saying you need to forecast down because these taxes are going to come in lower because of how the industry's doing and the like, and the reduced production. But I can't tell you what that is. So I have lower confidence. And those are to the large dollar amounts that impact the revenues. So from the big picture, the expenses, I'm fairly confident on. The revenues, less confident. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Rainey?
Yes, thank you. And again, I think you're doing a great job. It's just a real turkey shoot right now, I would think.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Councilmember Rainey, be careful. Ben's got to be able to get his head out of his office door tonight. I'd like to go back just for a second to Rachel's question about, or excuse me, Councilmember Medina's question about the grants. We haven't had that discussion because we haven't been able to go for them. But it's always a caution to the council, do not chase grants just to chase grants after you set the priorities of what you want to do. It does increase the expenditures, but the idea is to offset our expenditures because it's already a priority. We're just going to find the grants. Find the grants, we'll save that money and invest it somewhere else, either in the same project or a different one. It's a terrible idea. Everybody, 20 years ago, this was more the case that grants were free money. Now they're 25, 50% matching funds, and they're getting a lot more stringent on what you can spend it on. So the only one I've seen come through so far was the mental health one that the Chief Rucker brought forth. If we could have gotten that, we really need to take care of the mental health of our employees. So that would have been, go for that if we can get it. Other than that, generally, let's set the budget priorities, and then Chris Burkett goes and finds grants that are going to be available to help offset those costs.
Okay. Ben, I have another question. I heard that the town of Mancos has transaction fees on marijuana sales.
Yep.
Is that something we have?
No, it is not. For marijuana, all we have is sales tax. That's it. So any marijuana sales is treated just exactly the same as if it was a sale of tissue paper at Walmart, for example, or City Market, right? It's just a sales tax. That's it. There is a separate state tax on marijuana that the state collects. And then the state distributes that tax throughout all the governments throughout the state. So, for example, when we look here on page 19 of the budget, there's the state marijuana tax line item, and it's about 250,000, 255. That is the number that's projected to come in from that state remittances of collecting state marijuana tax. But locally, we do not have a transaction fee, an excise tax, a separate marijuana tax. It's just a regular sales tax.
So what would it take to introduce a transaction fee? Because I've heard Mancos's is $3 a transaction. I mean, do we know how many transactions there are in a year for those sales so that we could, estimate what that money would bring in? Because I've heard that they have that money specifically earmarked for their police force. So,
right.
I mean, that's kind of a good idea. We could do that, and that would offset, you know, some of the costs in the general fund for the police force.
Sure,
Okay.
and if you're not aware, I believe Dolores has a similar, when they approved marijuana in Dolores, I believe there was a similar approval of transaction fee of some sort. The process by which to get a fee structured, I would recommend talk to the city attorney to get specifics. If it's a tax, it would have to, I understand it would need to go to the citizens as a vote, as an item on a ballot and to be approved. So it's if you're wondering if there's something unilaterally that the city can do from a fee standpoint, I do not believe so. But I would defer a further discussion with the city attorney for guidance.
This is the mayor. I think that's definitely something we should look into. We'll check with the city attorney and see what it would look like in the future.
Yeah, who would be able to tell us like how many transactions there are in a year or over the years?
I'm sorry for not addressing that question. That's a good one. We actually don't see that. Okay. What we do see, however, when I say we, the finance department, we see sales tax collected by each remitter. Okay. So every business within the city limits that remit sales taxes, or not just in the city limits, every business that remits sales taxes to the city of Cortez has to file a sales tax return every month. Okay. On there, what we do see is gross sales and then the calculation by which sales tax is calculated from. We do not see the amount of transactions. Okay. But I'm sure there's some analysis that I could do by looking at those specific businesses to say, okay, here's the gross sales, and there's assumptions that we can make in, right? So, okay, we can assume gross sales are, I'm going to make numbers up. Gross sales for this one business is $100,000. And you can assume $100,000 is, 1,000 transactions at $100 each. Excuse me, that'd be wrong. 1,000 transactions at $100 each. Did I say that? To come up with 100,000, right? And then you can get an idea. But there'll be assumptions to get an idea where it would be like a range to say, here's what the fees could potentially bring in, as low as high as.
Okay, thank you. I think it's worth, looking into, so.
And it has been brought up before, and I think it's still something that we should pursue and get the ball rolling on.
Ben, my computer shut down. Could you make a note? I think I asked Linda to give a timeline backtracking, because we have discussed this before. It has to go on the ballot. So it was, let's backtrack to when we have to make that decision. So then we know how much time council has to debate it before we would have to, whatever the process is to get it on the ballot.
Okay.
But I believe I asked Linda to look into it and give me a timeline, and I haven't seen it, so maybe I didn't request it.
All right. I have a note here for that.
Thank you.
I'm glad we're not sitting in uncomfortable silence. A lot of good questions. Yeah, I'm going to assume there's anyone else there in the chambers, any other public?
No,
Nope, so just.
For our two attendees online, if you have a question, please, or comment, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll let you speak.
I'm going to tack on to, this is Arlena speaking, I'm going to tack on to David Rainey's compliment and make your head even bigger, Ben. I actually want to acknowledge both you and the city manager as well for trying to get us back to baseline and trying to get us actually using best practices. I'm sure both of you guys coming in, it was a huge mess. And I'm sure you guys don't hear thank yous enough. So thank you guys.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree too with what Amy and Arlene and everyone has said. You guys are doing a tremendous job, and it's a tough job and a lot of uncertainty, and we really appreciate all your efforts. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you. Just with go ahead, please. Okay, I was just gonna say with we have about 8 minutes left for the end of the meeting here. Is out of curiosity, since the meeting and about the budget, the special meeting we had a few weeks ago, and now some more questions have come out tonight. Is there anything that you've been dying to ask that you have not asked, or or items of clarity or questions where you're still not sure if you understand what's going on or how numbers are panning out? Hopefully it's not a mistake I've made, but please feel free to ask those.
Then I do have a question for you. Just so the council is made aware, when do the revenue bonds, I guess it would be or the sales tax on the rec center, when does that expire?
Yeah, I believe we'll go to the actual section here for the rec center. Oops, wrong one. And I believe that's in 2022. Enterprise Airport Recreation Center. Here we go. So it is in 2022, and we see that budgeted here on, what page are we on? Page 60? You bet. So we're on page 60 of the budget, and you'll see in 2022, the sales tax revenues dramatically decrease. And that's because we go from a 0.55 to 0.35 sales tax number. Then additionally, within the rec center, the loan that the rec center made to the general fund to build out City Hall will be paid off next year. That's what this $208,000 is in, and why it's a zero in 2022.
Yes, my point was we're dropping one tax to try to pick up another one.
Was that with the potential marijuana tax?
Yes.
So ideally, we would have something in place before, or like by the time that tax drops off, would be really convenient.
Yes.
I know you all are talking about, revenues, what ways to manage revenues. There are some items that come directly out of revenues that, you have the ability to change, not saying you want to, but I know there's confusion around it. So I'll just bring it up very briefly. And it's here in the revenue. So one here is the CREA vendor fee. So what that is sales taxes are automatically deducted, 2% from sales tax collected. It is automatically deducted and shared with CREA. And that's shared with CREA out of the general fund, street improvement fund, and the equipment fund. So that's something that you have control of. And right now it's just a 2% deduction and sharing. So if you're looking for, a lot of departments have reduced their expenses in order to manage our response to COVID. But in one aspect, you could say CREA has not. Now I'm just pointing it out. I have no inclination in one way or the other, but just making it clear because I think there's misunderstanding of what that is. All right, well, just with any other questions at this point? Okay, so just, I guess, to wrap up, right now I only have 2 items for further discussion. One item really for the budget. The other item is more for a long-term strategy component. But from a budget perspective, the only item for consideration is the $140,000 for airport road rebuild, whether we want to include that in our budget for 2021 or not. And what I'll do for that one is I'll bring that to, it won't be at at some point we'll have to get guidance whether that gets included in the budget or not. And I'll work with John Doherty on when to get that finalized, whether it's in or out. And then the second item is, again, the long-term is around marijuana tax, whether it's something that wants to be done or not. And we need to get a timeline of the process it would take to get such a question on the ballot. Is there anything else that I have missed that we've discussed that should be considered for inclusion or exclusion from the budget, the proposed budget, that is?
Up and down here, Ben.
Okay.
And there is, I guess, going to be an addition to the budget. We will discuss at the first meeting in October. I've already asked Linda to put it on for the work session to discuss I'm not sure how the homeless parking lot, I guess. That issue is going to have some expenditures that we need to talk with council about before we move forward. So,
Okay.
I don't know how much because I haven't sat down with Chief Knuckles and stuff and talked about his cost, but we do have some expenditures that is going to have to go into that if we do open that up. So,
Okay.
It's not going to be significant, so it's not anything to get all excited about. It'll be a slight change.
All right, so I've added that to my list. So there's really 2 budget items. One is the airport road rebuild, and then the homeless parking lot and related expenses. And Mr. City Manager, I'll work with you on how you'd like to bring those to council, whether we need to have a special session just based off of timeline here, or whether we want to expand the timeline, extend it a little longer so we can have these questions answered.
Okay.
Okay. And with that, it's 7 o'clock. And I guess I will say I appreciate everybody's time. And Emily and Jane being online and listening. I appreciate you being there. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to follow up with them. Just a reminder, I am taking general public comment for budget up through the end of next Friday. Suggestions, comments can be sent to me via email at finance.director@cityofcortez.com. With that,
Have we not gotten any public comment via email?
I believe a comment from online social media was shared with me today. And the comment was about defunding the COGS fee that we pay into. That's the only thing I've seen that was shared with me by by John Brooks, special event manager, who shared that with me. But other than that, I have not received any other comments.
And I didn't receive those comments and forwarded them on to all the council. So the comments I've received, you've already received.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, with that,
I'd also like to thank the council and the citizens. We had 3 more people than I've ever had in one of these, so this is great. And it's always nice to know that the citizens are interested in what we're doing, so it is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great job, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you and good night, folks.
Good night.
Good night.